Welcome to Two Beans in a Pod. New York City is really grappling with a severe affordability crisis right now. And the recent victory of Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani, well, it's placed a pretty profound and sweeping democratic socialist agenda squarely on the municipal table. His proposals, we're talking a significant tax hike on high-income earners and corporations, a citywide rent freeze on stabilized units, universal childcare, even city-owned public grocery stores and free buses. It's really an ambitious attempt to reshape the urban economy.
Right, and it really is a major inflection point. And I think the central question we need to tackle today is whether this very bold, democratic socialist platform can realistically and sustainably address New York City's systemic cost of living crisis, or will implementing such aggressive, frankly, non-market interventions inevitably destabilize what is, let's face it, a highly complex, dynamic capitalist economy here in the city.
Right. And I'll be arguing that these policies are not just necessary, but they represent overdue structural reforms, ones designed to achieve genuine social justice and hopefully long-term economic stability by, aligning economic power more closely with democratic accountability.
And I'm coming at this from a, let's say, slightly different perspective. I'm going to argue that while the goals are certainly admirable, these really expansive policies pose significant institutional and financial risks, primarily because I believe they are structurally incompatible with the established limitations of municipal governance within this massive global capitalist environment we operate in. The platform is often labeled utopian by skeptics, and I think that's precisely because it risks seeking affordability at the potential expense of overall economic vitality. The core tension, as I see it, lies here. Democratic socialism fundamentally aims for structural transformation. That often means collective ownership or, centralized regulation of key sectors. Now that ambition runs into direct conflict with the constraints of liberal democracy, which is fundamentally designed to limit state power and protect existing legal and market structures. And those constraints are extremely strict at the municipal level.
I see why you emphasize those structural limitations, but I'd frame the movement a bit differently. This platform feels necessary precisely because the current system has, failed to ensure basic human dignity for so many New Yorkers. We're trying to move beyond just the traditional social democratic approach, which mostly seeks to redistribute wealth within a capitalist framework, towards real structural reform. This means implementing collective decision-making in key sectors. For instance, things like public banking or city-owned utility services. These are real-world examples of shifting critical economic levers away from purely private profit maximization towards public welfare. These reforms prioritize equality and human dignity, which, that's the foundational commitment of democratic socialism, isn't it?
Okay, but let's ground this in a specific and I think high-risk policy, the rent freeze. Rent stabilization is already a pretty powerful form of price control. We have that. But a full freeze, as proposed, that seems highly problematic. Economic analysis, it consistently shows that policies like that suppress incentives for owners to maintain their properties and certainly to build new rental units. They tend to produce housing shortages and inevitably deepen the very crisis they intend to solve. We even saw a somewhat similar dynamic, arguably, with the recent $20 an hour fast food minimum wage hike out in California, which, according to some initial reports, seemed to contribute to employment dropping in that specific sector. It just demonstrates how imposing these kinds of artificially high, non-market floors can, distort the employment environment.
That's a compelling point regarding price floors generally. But I think the housing crisis is fundamentally different in scale and impact. Proposals like a rent freeze on New York's, roughly 1 million rent-stabilized units, they offer immediate, targeted relief that is just crucial for preventing mass displacement. And that's the most visible and destructive symptom of the current crisis, right? Furthermore, we have to look at the funding. The idea is that we can resource these public services through progressive taxation, ensuring that high earners and corporations who, let's be honest, have benefited most from the current system, provide the necessary resources to secure public welfare. There's economic data that supports intervention. When the public sector steps in to correct really profound market failures, society as a whole tends to benefit, even if some individual market players feel constrained.
I'm still not fully convinced by that line of reasoning, mainly because the core structural weakness for me remains the efficiency or potential lack thereof in non-market mechanisms. Let's focus for a second on the plan for government-run grocery stores. I mean, running a modern large-scale grocery business is an incredibly complex logistical feat. It requires high-volume purchasing, constant inventory management using, complex algorithms to minimize waste, tight control over supply chains. Private operators driven by profit margins and scale, they excel at this, or at least they're incentivized to. Introducing a government system, well, it just risks bureaucratic inefficiency, high residual costs, especially when you factor in high union labor costs in NYC, and potentially limited supply. Bureaucratic structures are often poorly equipped to manage perishable goods and rapidly shifting consumer demands.
That critique is valid, I suppose, if we were proposing some kind of Soviet-style command economy. But that's not what this is. This is a democratic city attempting to address a clear market failure. We have to defend public services not necessarily as direct competitors across the board, but as mission-driven utilities. They're designed to serve areas, think food deserts, high-cost neighborhoods that private chains often deliberately neglect because the profits aren't high enough. By eliminating the need for quarterly profit maximization and potentially removing costs associated with high commercial rent and property taxes, these public stores could radically undercut private pricing. And look internationally. The Singapore Fair Price Cooperative model is actually highly successful. It operates with minimal margins, something like 2% of revenue, and offers generics 10 to 15% cheaper than competitors. And they achieve this through rigorous professional public management and large-scale procurement.
Okay, but the comparison between a national cooperative in a place like Singapore and a single city's effort to manage highly unionized, specialized logistics here in the US, I'm not sure that's a perfect one-to-one comparison. And besides that, the rent freeze issue persists. It's a policy designed to stop displacement now, I get that, but it almost guarantees longer-term housing shortages and structural inefficiency by basically signaling disinvestment to builders.
But the fact that people are willing to make these extraordinary sacrifices just to save a few dollars, that underscores why immediate relief is so paramount. Think about the proposal for free buses. Studies are showing that people are so crushed by the cost of living that they will actually sacrifice 20 or even 30 minutes of their commute time just to avoid paying a small $2.90 fare. That dramatically illustrates the severity of the affordability crisis, right? And it helps justify aggressive, utility-focused interventions like zero-fare transit.
Which brings us directly to the overall financial feasibility, particularly concerning the labor costs inherent in any universal service like that. Raising the minimum wage significantly, while it increases labor costs, especially for small businesses. And while wage is certainly one factor, experts who work directly with local business owners often emphasize regulatory red tape over wages as the main difficulty. There was one analysis I saw that showed opening a simple barbershop in NYC requires something like 52 distinct steps, many of which have to be completed in person. So you have high labor costs, yes, but coupled with these significant, often onerous, administrative burdens, it just creates a deeply challenging environment for small business stability.
I'd argue that increasing the minimum wage and simplifying those administrative hurdles should really be viewed as two sides of the same coin. We can absolutely make operational streamlining a priority to help offset rising labor costs. And furthermore, some data does suggest that increased worker productivity has been observed alongside minimum wage hikes in retailing, even if overall store profits might decline nationally. We even see a model for this already in companies like Costco, right? They successfully pair high employee pay with exceptionally high operational efficiency and lower turnover. The funding mechanism taxing high earners is designed precisely to absorb these systemic costs for the greater good.
But let's look at the financial mechanics of, say, universal childcare. The successful Quebec model, which gets cited a lot, it did see increased women's labor participation in subsequent tax revenue. That's true. However, it's really unclear how those benefits, which are typically accrued through national or provincial income taxes, would translate effectively to the municipal level. The boost to NYC tax revenue from increased employment might simply not be nearly enough to cover the program's, frankly, astronomical operating costs entirely. That potentially leaves a very significant hole in the city budget.
My concern here is a bit different, though. Why must we demand that a socially transformative policy be entirely self-financing, solely through its immediate municipal tax returns? Universal childcare should be viewed as essential social infrastructure, like roads or schools. High childcare costs create this massive opportunity cost for society, especially by driving highly educated women out of the paid workforce. By alleviating that burden, we boost overall societal well-being and employment. We reduce dependency, strengthen families. Regardless of whether the city tax base instantly recovers every single dollar spent, it's an investment, not just an expense meant to yield an immediate dollar-for-dollar municipal return.
That kind of shifts the burden of proof onto future productivity rather than current fiscal reality, though, which makes municipal planning incredibly difficult.
Well, we believe in the power of these investments to regenerate the city's economic base over time.
Hey everyone, just taking a quick pause. If you're finding this discussion valuable, please take a moment to like this episode and subscribe to Two Beans in a Pod. It really helps us out. Okay, back to the debate.
Now let's consider the inherent political and structural incompatibility I mentioned earlier. My core skepticism relates to the near impossibility of implementing true democratic socialism, which seems to require maximum governmental control over the economy, within the very real constraints of U.S. municipal liberal democracy, which is fundamentally limited in its powers. Furthermore, these highly visible, high-cost flagship programs like the free bus system, estimated to cost anywhere from $600 to $800 million annually, they are often arguably a poor use of capital. Technical studies tend to show that investments in increasing service frequency, reliability, and capacity, things like the proposed QueensLink project for new transit capacity in Queens, are actually far more effective at boosting ridership and real mobility than merely eliminating fares.
I'm not entirely convinced by that line of reasoning, primarily because the platform, I think, should be viewed not as some utopian blueprint for complete revolution, but more as the left wing of the possible. It's about advancing immediate, attainable reforms that address core equity issues. The free bus system, for example, directly benefits the most vulnerable citizens who really struggle with regressive transit costs every day. And moreover, the broader DSA platform seeks transformative change by tackling systemic issues beyond just economics.
Okay, but those other issues carry massive risks too, don't they? Let's talk about carceral reform for a moment. The DSA platform calls for a pretty severe reduction in policing and ultimately the abolition of the carceral state. Now, we have seen some serious consequences tied to recent reforms in this area. For example, the HALT Act, which significantly restricts the use of solitary confinement in New York State prisons, has been statistically linked by some analysis to a notable increase in violence within correctional facilities. Similarly, drug decriminalization experiments, like the one out in Oregon, have unfortunately coincided with a sharp proliferation of open-air drug markets, raising very severe public safety concerns for residents.
Those are definitely real concerns, and they absolutely must be managed carefully. But framing it that way presents the reforms as purely about reduced enforcement, rather than about fundamental structural change. The purpose of these policies, as I understand it, is to end the criminalization of working-class survival and poverty itself. For instance, defunding quality-of-life policing programs is intended to stop the cycle where minor offenses, often driven by things like homelessness or poverty, lead to arrests, fines, and fees that just further trap people in debt and the criminal justice system. The goal isn't just reduction, it's to divest from punitive mechanisms and instead invest in housing, mental health services, and community-based solutions, things that might actually reduce the drivers of crime in the first place.
I agree that the objective is or should be to address systemic issues. But the challenge, the real difficulty, lies in choosing objectives that are both aligned with those principles and are practically attainable without jeopardizing public safety in the interim. Focusing on what you yourself called utopian slogans, like, the recent attempts to abolish or defund the police, which, let's be honest, ultimately failed to yield substantive, widely supported reform, it risks creating a backlash that actually sets back the entire movement. It has to be achievable.
Look, we have to acknowledge that this platform represents an aggressive, yes, but potentially necessary attempt to build collective power and create a more equitable system. It fundamentally challenges the core assumptions of the traditional capitalist framework that has governed New York City for so long. Mamdani's election itself, I think, reflects a powerful and popular desire to fundamentally restructure municipal governance to prioritize collective well-being and social justice through real economic democracy.
The desire for change is absolutely undeniable. I grant you that. However, the ultimate success of this ambitious approach hinges entirely on navigating these profound institutional and economic constraints we've been discussing. The administration must avoid the all-too-common tendency of ambitious programs to fall victim to inefficient, bureaucratic implementation. And maybe most critically, they have to find a way to somehow reconcile these sweeping socialist objectives, which typically require high levels of centralized control, with these severe limitations imposed by municipal governance within a competitive liberal democratic system. That's the tightrope walk.
Yeah, I think the debate really eliminates the high stakes involved here. It's fundamentally about whether structural inequality can be swiftly reversed through bold, coordinated intervention, or if these interventions will end up imposing unsustainable costs and complexity on the city's future operations.
Exactly. The fundamental question remains that tension between democratic accountability on one hand and centralized economic management on the other. It's a tough balance.
Thank you for listening to Two Beans in a Pod. If you're interested in the book, order from the link below.